you? Are you ever going to see your money again? Well, let's try and get you some help here. So yesterday, as you heard, the South Gauteng High Court placed Comair, the parent company of British Airways and Kulula, under provisional liquidation. So the airline faces financial pressure and is no longer able to meet its financial obligations. So Comair cannot pay aircraft storage, cannot pay maintenance and insurance costs. So, in other words, it cannot keep its fleet in the air. The liquidation is expected to help Comair to preserve its fleet of aircraft valued at around about 3.5 billion rand. But at the same time, experts are warning of sharp rises in domestic airline ticket prices, with another player out of the game. I mean, there are reports of tickets that could cost up to 3 to 4 times the price that they usually do on the airlines that are left. Well, to help us make sense of all of this, we are now joined by Tobie Jordaan, who is the head of business rescue, restructuring and insolvency at Cliff Decker Hofmeyr. Tobie, great to have you. Thanks so much for helping us understand what is going to happen going forward.
Morning, Leanne, and thank you for having me on your show.
All right, so let's be pretty simple here. What does this all mean? I mean, when we talk about that it's now gone into liquidation, what does that mean?
So, Leanne, we need to be technical about it slightly and say that it's gone into provisional liquidation. And what that means is that a court has not yet granted a final order. So the court has asked all the parties that are affected by the granting of the provisional order, those parties would be creditors and employees, to come back to court at the end of July and to come and show cause as to why a final order should not be granted.
So if we look at, obviously there's a lot of people that are owed money in the pecking order here. So, you know, you've got the parent company Comair, and I mean, there's banks, there's SARS, there's employees, there are a lot of people to get through before you even get to the consumer. Talk to us about how this actually works in terms of paying off the debt now.
So, Leanne, it's a long process that must be followed. The next process after the granting of a final liquidation order would be the appointment of liquidators. The liquidators will then be tasked to wind up the estate, and what that effectively means is that they will go and sell off the assets in order to pay the creditors. So yes, in a liquidation, there's a ranking and a waterfall of payment to creditors, and unfortunately, our consumers or the customers will rank far below, far behind in that list, and will probably only be paid last.
That's very disappointing, I imagine, for a lot of people that spent money, and especially on the airlines, where it was this speculation that they started holding specials just before they actually called this off, and these people now spent their money, and they've really, the chances are they're not going to get the value that they spent on the tickets. But even if it does get to the customer, how does it actually work? I mean, would they get a percentage of the money spent, if at all anything?
So, Leanne, we've seen in the press that there are certain offers that have been made to some of the category or a category of customers that will be refunded, either who used through a certain platform, or there will be chargebacks on the credit cards. But if you have a customer that do not fall into any of those categories, the customer would have to submit a claim in the liquidated estate. So it would have to file an affidavit, submit a claim, set out the outstanding amount, and will have to wait for its claim to be paid. It's likely that because of the size of this liquidation, looking at the asset value and the number of creditors, that customers can expect to receive less than 10% of what they paid. So if we put it into a formula, if we just talk numbers, if you paid 2.5 grand for a return flight, you're probably going to be paid less than 250 rand.
Oh man, I think I could just hear the sound of hearts breaking as you said that. I mean, that is hard for people to digest at a point like this. I suppose I need to go back to the beginning though, and ask you how we got here. I mean, obviously we know that the airlines, or Comair, was under business rescue. What went wrong?
So, Leanne, they've been under business rescue for about 2 years. I think COVID obviously didn't help. All the different waves didn't help. And also when their flights were grounded earlier this year because of safety concerns. So effectively what happened is that the business rescue practitioners concluded that they don't believe that there's a reasonable prospect of rescuing the airline. And when that happens, practitioners, in order to avoid liability, is obliged to immediately inform all parties of its conclusion that it's reached, that there's no longer a reasonable prospect of rescuing the company, and then to immediately apply to court to discontinue the business rescue proceedings and to ask the court to put the company into liquidation.
Now, when we look at the amount that they've said here, so the liquidation is expected to help Comair preserve its fleet of aircraft valued at 3.5 billion rand. Perhaps you can explain that to us now. You've got the aircraft. They're going to hopefully retain that, or if I'm not mistaken in this. So what happens there?
So it depends. A liquidator has various options. It could either go off and sell the assets on a piecemeal basis. So therefore, it could sell certain aircraft to certain parties and certain aircraft to other parties. Or alternatively, it could sell the business as a whole. It all depends on the interest for the airline.
So, I mean, they could... yeah. Sorry, carry on.
No, effectively what it means when you preserve assets is that the company is placed in the hands of a liquidator in order to liquidate and to wind up the estate in order to get to a position to pay all creditors.
So, I mean, it could get to a point, as you say, that perhaps there is a buyer in the backstage waiting to walk in and say, look, here's the value, we'll give this to you and we'll take over the company. That could be a possibility.
Absolutely. And I mean, the rumors are already out there that there are some investors in the wings waiting to snatch up the airline for a bargain, because automatically that would happen in a liquidation.
I want to talk about, I mean, obviously we've spoken about the individual who's forked out money to go and buy a ticket. And as you say, if they get 10%, it'll be a big deal of the value of their ticket. But that's going to take a long time and a lot of effort to even get those few hundred rands back. But the staff, now this is a big problem because, I mean, we're talking about a lot of employees. Where does this leave them? What happens now?
Fortunately, another little bit of bad news from our side. What happens on the granting of provisional order is that the employment contracts are automatically suspended. So that means that the employees are not obliged to rock up at work to continue offering a service or rendering a service. But unfortunately, it also means that they will no longer be paid a salary. And effectively, any claim that they have for arrears salaries, they will, as any other creditor, would have to submit a claim in the liquidation and will be repaid once the liquidation is finalized.
Yeah. Benefits, all of those kind of things for the employees, what happens there? And UIF, I imagine UIF is still an option.
So UIF is absolutely an option in the interim. So employees can immediately, and I would recommend to the employees that they immediately get all their paperwork in place in order to lodge a claim with the UIF, because it could be some time before they receive a payment from the liquidators. Yeah.
So I mean, this is a very, very lengthy process, as you've been saying to us. I mean, if we look at processes like this, how long are we talking? Are we talking months, years? What would we look at?
And unfortunately, we're looking at about, I would say, 3 years, if not longer. Liquidation processes can take a long time to conclude, especially when you look at an airline, especially when you look at the size of this liquidation. If you look at the number of creditors, if you look at anticipated litigation that may unfold in the liquidation process.
That was something I wanted to talk on, is the prospective litigation in all of this. I mean, I suppose everybody's entitled to litigation on this towards Comair. Are there ramblings already that this could be in the pipeline?
No ramblings that I've heard, but it's normal for any party to anticipate, or for a liquidator to anticipate that there may be litigation unfolding in its liquidation process. Normally what a liquidation is known for is insolvency inquiries, where the liquidator will subpoena certain parties to come to an inquiry and to give evidence as to the affairs of the company before it was placed into liquidation.
Yeah. Tobie, just one last question. I mean, when we look at, obviously it's Comair consisting of Kulula and British Airways. Now, British Airways has a mother company. Obviously, it's the big British Airways operating flights and still business as usual for them. What liability, or what is the damage, and it is a reputational damage, I imagine, to British Airways. What happens there? How is that? That is a bit of a complex issue from my side. I'm not sure if it is complicated in reality, but I mean, what happens to the mother company of British Airways and what Comair find themselves in now?
So, Leanne, it is complicated and becomes complicated. And I hear your question from a damages perspective, from a reputational damages perspective. But one must immediately then consider that any damages that BA may have suffered as a result, or to its reputation as a result of the liquidation of Comair, would not have any security attached to their claim. So meaning that they won't be in any different position than the poor consumer that had bought a flight and stands to receive almost no cents in the rand. So unfortunately, sometimes you have to consider it from a commercial perspective and determine whether it's actually worth your while to pick that fight if you look at the potential return that may be coming your way.
All right, Tobie, thank you. Thanks. We really appreciate you coming on and explaining this to us. I think a lot of people in a very difficult situation, and one can only think of the employees, those that have spent money on tickets, and everybody, or particularly the employees that now are really in a very difficult time. Tobie Jordaan, thank you, Head of Business Rescue, Restructuring and Insolvency at Cliff Decker Hofmeyr, talking to us after the South Gauteng High Court placed Comair, the parent company of British Airways and Kulula, under provisional liquidation. Let's take a quick break. We'll have your headlines after this. Stay tuned.